Never had that moment when you order your favorite meal, but what arrives is something completely different, like asking for pepperoni and getting anchovies with pineapple instead. Now picture that scenario, except replace pizza with military support and the toppings with humans. Commander Zethar of the Galactic Coalition's 47th Defense Fleet leaned over the comms console, his expression best described as someone realizing their refreshing morning drink had been swapped with liquid misery. His four eyes, because apparently nature on his world decided two weren't nearly enough, blinked in an odd sequence, like a confused set of traffic lights. "Say that again, Central Command," Zethar said, his tone carrying the worn-out patience of a customer service rep on their 1000th call. The holographic figure of Admiral Quilch flickered, either from poor signal transmission or as a subtle sign of unease. It was always hard to tell with high-ranking bureaucrats. "We've dispatched reinforcements from the Terran sector, Commander. They'll be arriving by the next rotation." "Terran sector," Zethar repeated slowly, rolling the words around his tongue as if testing for poison. "You mean Earth, that Class 12 Deathworld." "That's correct," the Admiral replied evenly. "The same planet where predators abandoned safe tree branches and thought, 'Hey, let's climb down and start stabbing things with sharpened sticks.' Commander, I detect some hesitation. The world where acid rains in some places, ice entombs oceans in others, and giant slabs of land casually smash into each other just to keep things interesting." Silence filled the channel. Technically, in the void of space, no one could hear a facepalm, but Zethar was convinced that's exactly what the Admiral had just done. "Look," Quilch finally said, his tone slipping into the voice of someone desperate. "I understand humanity's reputation, but the Coalition is stretched thin. The Vicari Empire is pressing harder on the rim every day. Options are dwindling. And really, how dangerous can humans be?" Zethar almost laughed. Those words belonged on a list of the galaxy's most foolish last statements, right beside, "What's the worst that could happen?" The human starship looked less like a marvel of engineering and more like the outcome of an over-enthusiastic child's sketch, where every suggestion of "add more spikes" had been taken as gospel. Coalition vessels usually embodied elegance, smooth arcs, polished surfaces, designs perfected over millennia of trial and refinement. By contrast, this ship seemed to shout its defiance at every known principle of aerodynamics. The name blazoned across its side only confirmed the suspicion: the tenacious bastard. Clearly, humans had no regard for the Coalition's long-standing traditions of noble and dignified nomenclature. "Transmission incoming from the human vessel," announced Lieutenant Crickstall from his console, his crystalline tones clipped and careful. "Put it through," Commander Zethar replied, tugging his uniform into sharp lines and straightening his posture. Appearances mattered, especially with a species whose approach to diplomacy, according to every file Zethar had read, often resembled a reckless entrance followed by an even more reckless promise of salvation. The viewscreen blinked, then steadied into the image of a human male. If someone had asked Zethar to picture a walking recruitment poster for reckless violence, this man would have fit perfectly. He was tall, far taller than most bipedal species considered reasonable, with short black hair and an aura of practiced confidence. His stance suggested he'd faced more battles than he cared to count, and that he firmly believed most of life's problems could be solved with the precise application of controlled destruction. "Commander Zethar, I presume." The human's voice was deep, carrying an accent that sounded forged in a land where both rainfall and explosions were measured in equal abundance. "Lieutenant Commander Devon Blackwood, Terran Defense Corps. We're here to assist." Zethar gave the polite half-bow that protocol demanded. "Welcome to the Kepler Defense Line, Commander Blackwood. The Coalition appreciates your reinforcement. Though I admit," his tone shifted to diplomatic neutrality, "we expected something more conventional." Blackwood's smile flashed across the screen. It wasn't malicious, but it wasn't comforting either. It was the kind of grin that reminded Zethar why prey species developed such effective instincts to flee. The expression radiated amusement at danger and a hint of joy at the chaos of survival. Conventionals overrated, Blackwood said easily. Besides, you asked for help with the Vicari fleet, didn't you? Zethar's mandibles twitched in a gesture that might pass for a sigh. Yes, though perhaps I should have clarified the type of assistance we anticipated. Blackwood leaned forward slightly, expression sharpened by confidence. Relax, Commander. The tenacious bastard may not look like much, but it's built to fight. You'll see. There was no arrogance in his tone, Zethar noted, just certainty. That somehow was worse. We tend to specialize in difficult opponents, Zethar explained, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested deep unease. The Vicari hold numerical superiority, advanced shield matrices, and their entire fleet doctrine revolves around brutal frontal assaults. Our analysts believe they're preparing a simultaneous strike across 3 sectors. That's adorable, Blackwood replied with the kind of casual tone one might use when describing a minor inconvenience. Sounds like a Tuesday. Zethar paused, unsure whether that was a human idiom or a horrifying window into their standard workweek. How many ships are involved? Preliminary scans place their force at 47 heavy cruisers, 15 dreadnoughts, and nearly 200 escort craft, Zethar said carefully. Blackwood's eyebrow rose. That's it. I beg your pardon. Just checking, Blackwood said, leaning back as though he'd been told the weather forecast. Sometimes intel has a habit of downplaying the details. So 260 or so, all told. Zethar's translator stuttered, producing a faint grinding sound as if trying to flag a logical inconsistency. Commander Blackwood, allow me to ensure you fully grasp the situation. The Coalition's defensive line consists of 12 ships. You have arrived with, he trailed off, antennae twitching. Just the one, Blackwood said cheerfully, gesturing vaguely behind him. But don't worry, she's got bite, 47 crew, all volunteers. The silence that followed was palpable. Even the bridge's ambient hum seemed to quiet, as though the ship itself was pausing to evaluate the sheer absurdity of the claim. 47, Zethar repeated slowly, against 262 vessels. Blackwood grinned, unfazed. Well, when you phrase it that way, it does sound a little unfair. For them, I mean. Chapter 3. Cultural exchange. 20 minutes later, Commander Zethar was standing aboard the tenacious bastard, wrestling with the impossible task of reconciling his expectations with reality. Coalition warships were paragons of order, sleek command centers with sterile efficiency, uniform symmetry, and regulation-approved aesthetics. The human vessel, however, looked as though someone had taken a pristine starship and then challenged a group of imaginative rebels to make it practical. The result was chaos masquerading as functionality. Cables crisscrossed the walls in tangled webs, arranged with no regard for engineering principles Zethar recognized. Consoles were angled in ways that defied both ergonomics and common sense. Every surface seemed to bear the scars of repeated modifications, patches, and adjustments made with the philosophy that, if it works, it stays. And yet, beneath the madness, there was purpose. Every station buzzing with energy, every crew member moving with the surety of people who had built this environment around themselves. Blackwood offered a half-apologetic smile. Yeah, it's a bit messy. We've done some upgrades. Upgrades, Zethar repeated, stepping carefully across the uneven flooring like he was touring some kind of experimental art installation. One console was bolted to the deck at an angle so bizarre it felt like a deliberate insult to ergonomic design. Nothing major, Blackwood said with casual ease. Just tweaks to the targeting system's power distribution reinforced the hull a little. He paused. Oh, and we added some weapons. Zethar blinked. Some? Fine, a lot. Turns out the original builders had no imagination. You'd be amazed how much firepower you can cram onto a single ship if you stop worrying about warranty clauses. As they moved forward, one crew member came into view. She was perched on what looked suspiciously like a plasma cannon grafted into the space where a hydroponics bay should have been, adjusting dials with one hand while cheerfully waving with the other. "That's Reynolds," Blackwood explained proudly. "Best gunner in the quadrant. Once hit a target 40,000 clicks away while the ship was spinning out of control." Zethar's ridged brows drew tight. "Why was the ship spinning out of control?" Blackwood cleared his throat. "Long story. Short version. Never let Ensign park near the helm right after he's reprogrammed the nav systems for efficiency." They stepped into a chamber Blackwood proudly introduced as the Situation Room. To Zethar's eyes, it looked less like a command center and more like a brainstorm session where engineers had shouted over one another until someone bolted their half-finished ideas into reality. Projectors jutted from ceiling, walls, and even the floor, each firing beams into a central hollow table. Charts, tactical readouts, and hand-sketched diagrams plastered the bulkheads, some detailing elaborate theories on how to dismantle a dreadnought with nothing more than timing and audacity. "All right, let's talk strategy," Blackwood said, activating the display. Blue sigils marked coalition forces. Red blots denoted Vicary fleets. The enemy formation loomed like a tidal wave, sheer numbers and brute force designed to overwhelm. Zethar pointed to a sector. "The coalition playbook calls for establishing a defensive perimeter near the fourth planet. Use the asteroid belt here as cover. It would force the Vicary into a series of smaller engagements." Blackwood studied the projection as though considering flavors at an ice cream shop. "That's one approach, casualty estimates. If fortune favors us, we lose 60%. And if fortune doesn't, then we're annihilated, but we'll drag enough of them down with us to make their next conquest hesitate." Blackwood leaned closer, eyes narrowing at the enemy icons. "All right then, tell me more about their ships." Zethar gestured toward the glowing red icons. "Their heavy cruisers are built around a central plasma core with layered shielding. As for the dreadnoughts, those things carry enough firepower to split a moon in half. Their escorts are fast enough to run down anything that tries to run." He paused, then added, "But they do have weaknesses. When their shields take a full surge of damage, they need 15 seconds to cycle and recharge. Dreadnoughts are devastating, yes, but sluggish when maneuvering. And those escorts. Speed comes at the cost of armor." Blackwood continued to fiddle with the holographic overlay, dragging symbols across the display with the idle precision of a man playing a board game. "Formation discipline?" he asked without looking up. "Hi," Zethar admitted. "They keep tight patterns, almost machine-like. Every strike coordinated, no wasted movement." "That's a shame," Blackwood muttered, genuine disappointment in his tone. "The chaotic ones are always more fun to deal with." Zethar's mandibles twitched in thought. He was beginning to suspect humanity had an odd relationship with the concept of fun, one that most sentient species would find deeply unsettling. "So," he asked carefully, torn between professional interest and a growing sense of dread, "what's your plan?" Blackwood's grin spread slowly, almost conspiratorial. "Oh, it's a little unconventional. Let me be absolutely clear about this," Zethar said an hour later, glaring at the tactical display as though it had committed a personal offense against his ancestors. "You want to fly straight at the enemy fleet." "Not straight at," Blackwood corrected, tilting his head as though the nuance mattered. "Think of it more as aggressively toward, subtle distinction." Zethar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Aggressively toward a fleet of 262 warships, with just yourself." "Not just me," Blackwood replied, cheerful as ever. "I've got my crew, 46 fine men and women, 47 if you count me. Which you should, because I'm the one with the plan." "This is insanity." Zethar pressed two of his four hands against his temples, the gesture equivalent to "I am developing a migraine in more than one dimension." "You do understand," he continued wearily, "that even if you somehow manage to disrupt their formation, they'll regroup and continue the assault." Blackwood's grin widened. "Oh, we're not aiming to disrupt their formation." He tapped the holographic table, zooming in on several points within the enemy cluster. We're aiming to ruin their entire day. Zethar's mandibles twitched. And how exactly do you intend to accomplish this? Well, Blackwood said, as though discussing a favorite hobby, there's this old Terran combat doctrine called ramming speed. I have not heard of it, Zethar said flatly, and I strongly suspect I will regret asking. It's pretty simple, Blackwood explained with unnerving enthusiasm. You push the engines to maximum and smash your ship into theirs. Surprisingly effective. Though yes, admittedly, it tends to be hard on the hull. Zethar felt his second stomach knot itself, a physiological reflex his species reserved for the moment one realized they were in the presence of utter, weaponized stupidity. You cannot possibly mean to ram 262 ships, he said, his voice low with dread. Oh no, Blackwood said breezily. That would be wasteful. We're only targeting the important ones, Blackwood said, tapping several ships in the enemy formation on the holographic display. Command vessels, shield generators, and what looked like their primary coordination nodes. The idea, he continued, is to maximize chaos with minimal ramming. Hit the right targets in the right sequence, and the entire formation collapses like a deck of cards in a hurricane. Zethar's four eyes widened. And how exactly do you intend to survive ramming multiple enemy ships? Who said anything about surviving? Blackwood countered, chuckling at Zethar's horrified expression. Relax, Commander. We've upgraded the ship a bit to help with the whole not dying in a horrible explosion part. He led Zethar to another display, showing a detailed schematic of the tenacious bastard. Zethar stared for a long moment, trying in vain to reconcile what he was seeing with any notion of conventional Starship engineering. What is that? He asked cautiously, pointing at the reinforced bow. That's our reinforced section, Blackwood said casually. About 6 meters of armored plating backed by a secondary structural integrity field generator. And that? Zethar asked, pointing to a massive cylindrical structure running through the ship's core. Emergency acceleration tube, Blackwood explained. Basically, if we need to go really, really fast in a straight line, we can channel every ounce of power through the main engine. In other words, you've turned your ship into a missile, Zethar muttered, tone somewhere between disbelief and awe. A reusable missile, Blackwood corrected. Very important distinction. He swiped the schematic, revealing the ship's layered shield system. It looked like nothing Zethar had ever studied, defying several principles of energy distribution. Instead of the standard spherical shield, the ship's defenses were arranged in concentric layers, like an onion of sheer stubbornness. Most ships spread shield energy evenly, Blackwood said. Good for general protection, not so great for ramming things. We've refocused ours to blast maximum power forward while keeping the rest of the ship minimally shielded. So yeah, if someone shoots from behind, we're in trouble. And yet you plan to move away at high speed after impact, Zethar asked. Exactly, Blackwood said with a grin. Problem solved. Zethar's second stomach clenched. Now he understood why humans were officially considered a species of concern by the Galactic Safety Administration. And your crew, they agree to this. Oh, they love it, Blackwood said. Humans get more excited about dangerous plans, not less. Evolution has trained us for situations where the choice was either certain death or probably death, so we go with proactive problem solving instead of standing around whining. Zethar sighed and adjusted his uniform. That explains a great deal about your species. The next few hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Zethar observed from the observation deck of the tenacious bastard, trying to reconcile the organized mayhem unfolding below. The human crew moved with a cheerful efficiency that suggested they genuinely enjoyed their work, which, from everything Zethar had seen, they absolutely did. Reynolds, status on the forward plasma cannons, Blackwood called over the intercom. All green, Skipper, came the crisp reply. Added some custom mods to the targeting computers. We can now hit things that technically don't exist yet. Outstanding. Park navigation. Course plotted and triple-checked. 17 exit strategies programmed, plus one that involves hiding behind their largest ship until they forget we're here. That's my boy, Blackwood said approvingly. Engineering, came the next report. All systems optimal, sir. Acceleration tube ready for testing, and I've managed to squeeze another 12% efficiency out of the power core. How'd you manage that? Blackwood asked. Asked it nicely, came the reply. Zethar decided he didn't want to ask how human engineering actually worked. It seemed to rely heavily on as yet uninvented concepts and safety margins that existed mostly in theoretical math. Zethar turned to Blackwood, who was reviewing tactical displays while simultaneously tinkering with a handheld weapon. Commander, I have to ask, how exactly did your crew volunteer for this mission? Oh, that's easy, Blackwood said casually. I put out a general announcement. Anyone wanting to attempt something unprecedented, probably impossible according to most military analysts, and with a solid chance of either spectacular success or spectacular death, step right up. And people volunteered, had to turn some away. Humans love a challenge, especially ones that come with bragging rights. From across the bridge, someone shouted, "Hey, Skipper, remember that time we took out a pirate base while pretending to be a supply ship?" "Which time?" Blackwood called back. "We've done that at least 6 times. The one where we actually were a supply ship, but Parker forgot to mention it had experimental explosives. Oh, that was a fine day. The pirates just sat there, utterly confused, as we unloaded 40 tons of boom into their storage bay." Zethar wisely decided not to ask for further details. The crew continued their preparations with a mixture of professional skill and casual banter that suggested they'd done this sort of thing many times before. Weapon systems were calibrated with precision normally reserved for surgical instruments. Navigation computers were programmed with courses that seemed to require an advanced degree in applied insanity. And through it all, the crew maintained a good humor that would have been alarming if it weren't so contagious. "You know," Blackwood said, joining Zethar at the observation window, "your people have been fighting this war for what, 3 years, 4 years, 7 months, and 16 days, right? And in all that time," Blackwood asked casually, "has anyone ever tried just ignoring conventional wisdom?" Zethar considered the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, everyone assumes that in a fleet engagement you form up coordinate attacks, follow established doctrine. But what if that's exactly what the enemy expects?" Zethar paused. "That actually makes sense. See, humans have this advantage. We're relatively new to galactic civilization, so we haven't memorized all the rules of how things are supposed to work. Which means if the conventional approach fails, we try something non-traditional. If that fails, we try something even less traditional. Eventually, you either solve the problem or create a completely different problem that's at least more interesting." Zethar's mandibles twitched in thought. Human military doctrine, it seemed, relied less on rigid strategy and more on enthusiastic improvisation. "And it works?" he asked. "So far, yes. We've been part of galactic civilization for 50 years and somehow we haven't been conquered, enslaved, or eaten. That's better than a lot of species can say. And being ignored. Oh, that happens too," Blackwood said with a grin, "but not usually for long." A chime sounded over the ship's communications system. Lieutenant Murphy's voice came briskly through the speakers. "All hands, enemy fleet detected at the edge of the system. Estimated time to engagement range, 4 hours. "Right on schedule," Blackwood said, heading back to the command station. "Want to stick around for the show, Commander?" Zethar looked out at the approaching fleet, then back at the human crew preparing for what any sensible being would consider a suicide mission. Finally, he nodded. "You know what? Yes. I think I'd like that." The Vicari fleet entered the system with the subtlety of a natural disaster with a personal vendetta. 262 ships moved in a formation that reflected centuries of military tradition, and firepower so overwhelming that diplomacy seemed quaint at best. "Impressive," Blackwood said, eyes scanning the sensor readouts. "They're not leaving anything to chance." "The Vicari don't believe in chances," Zethar replied. "Their military philosophy is all about massive, overwhelming force, applied with mathematical precision. Boring but effective." On the main display, the enemy fleet advanced in perfect order. Heavy cruisers formed the outer shell, weapons primed and shields at full strength. Dreadnoughts held the center, bristling with firepower capable of sterilizing a small moon. Escorts flanked the formation, moving with impeccable coordination, ready to respond to any threat. Zethar couldn't help but feel a grudging respect. The fleet was a thing of terrifying beauty, a machine designed to dominate, conquer, and erase entire civilizations from history. "Murphy," Blackwood called out, "tactical analysis." "They're maintaining standard approach formation, Skipper," Murphy reported. "Looks like they plan to split into 3 assault groups once they reach optimal firing range." "Classic Vicary doctrine. Any surprises?" Blackwood asked, swiveling in his chair. "Negative. They're following the tactical manuals to the letter." "Well,"